part of his continuing trip to Asia. He spoke this morning to business executives at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. He told the CEOs that the United States has not been treated fairly in international trade. But now the president said the U.S. will set trade policy under the guideline of America First. So far in Asia, President Trump has been getting fairly positive reviews. He's looked presidential, and he didn't, despite some early concerns, trigger a trade war with China or a nuclear war with North Korea. I spoke earlier with a source who has direct knowledge of the details of the trip. He told me that the president's advisors worked hard to tone down the speech he made here in South Korea. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. In fact, if you listen to what our president said, it's clear we're on a collision course with the regime. And that's enormously dangerous. The president said repeatedly and in the strongest terms possible that North Korea must disarm, that it must stop developing nuclear weapons or face military consequences. He said every step North Korea takes to advance its nuclear weapons makes the regime less safe. But North Korea shows no sign of disarming. So this has become a game of chicken over weapons of mass destruction. We have been down this road before. But this time, the consequences are more serious than anything most, if any of us, have ever experienced. We're talking about the possibility of a nuclear war in our lifetimes, or at least of a conventional war that could spread across Asia. What are the chances of this actually happening? Well, a retired four-star general told me he thinks there's a 51% chance of war with North Korea before next summer. Even if that's too high, even if it's 10%, the risk is not zero. No way. And if this does break out, this city is in big trouble. Because right now, all the time in fact, North Korea has thousands of rockets and artillery pieces pointed here. If the North Korean regime feels threatened, if it feels it's being driven from power, it can, and military experts say it probably would, destroy Seoul. And the South Koreans, the 25 million people living in this city, can't do much about it. They're stuck between Kim Jong-un on one side, who's determined to have a nuclear weapon program, and President Trump, who wants to take it away. You can imagine how it makes people pretty nervous here, especially this week, when President Trump arrived in Asia with an armada, and while the military here is in high gear.
Ninja 01, just verify your number 1.
Copy.
Ninja 2 is going to split off right now. VFR coming to you.
Here at Osan, they've been preparing for war for more than 6 decades.
We have no BFM airspace.
This is the closest airbase to North Korea, so if war breaks out, it will be both a key launch pad for American firepower and an obvious target for incoming fire from the north. I joined Captain Kyle Moses, a.k.a. the Beast.
Climb up the ladder. Climb up the ladder.
Yeah. All right. On a mission to one of the most dangerous spots on the planet.
All right, watch your elbows. Canopy's coming down.
The demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. The North Koreans have been threatening to shoot U.S. planes out of the sky, so even a routine mission is dangerous now.
Ground Traps 1, ready in sequence, 9 left. Traps 1, clear for takeoff. Visor down. Seat is armed. Here we go.
And it doesn't take long for Captain Moses to demonstrate why they call him the Beast.
All right, get ready for some G here.
After takeoff, he puts us straight into a roll. The plane takes on up to 9 times the force of gravity, or 9G.
Wow, how's that?
That was intense.
Yeah.
As we reach the front lines, Captain Moses positions his F-16 very carefully.
So this is about the north edge of the airspace. We're about 7 miles from the North Korean border right here.
So this is as far as you can go without provoking a war?
Yep.
Now, can we look into North Korea?
Oh yeah. Over those mountains there, you can see into North Korea there.
So, is that where all their artillery is and all those rockets?
Oh yeah.
If you were called into aggressive action, would that be possibly a target?
Yeah, that could definitely be something we could go after.
We head back to Osan.
Traps 1, clear to land, 9 left.
Another routine patrol ending, thankfully, without incident. The pace here is relentless. Captain Moses' 36th Squadron flies F-16s, but the base is also home to modernized U-2 spy planes that depart on 12-hour flights at high altitude, keeping a constant watch on the enemy to the north. For months now, the U.S. military has been quietly beefing up its presence in the region, and we've been following every step. In August, joint drills with the South Koreans suddenly took on a whole new urgency. The enemy is left unnamed, but it's clear which battle they're rehearsing for. In September, we watched as American troops moved a battery of THAAD missiles, the most advanced missile interceptors in the world, into position. Missile defense systems aren't just about defense. They give those who have them the ability to attack and survive a counterattack. And while the THAAD has not yet been used against real incoming missiles, it adds another layer of protection to the extensive missile defense system already in place. Then, just a couple of weeks ago, what the president called an armada arrived in the peninsula. 3 aircraft carrier strike groups capable of sustaining a prolonged air campaign. Military experts believe all this hardware is not just here for show.
We're actually dealing with potential outcomes by next summer of all-out war, with millions displaced and hundreds of thousands killed and wounded.
Retired 4-star General Barry McCaffrey is a decorated veteran of war. He says that in the case of North Korea, there are no good options.
There are military options. They're all bad. If we went in with a massive conventional air and sea attack aimed at their nuclear capacity, we'd get 95% of it in the first 72 hours. But we wouldn't get all of it, or we wouldn't be sure. And that would probably trigger a very high-intensity conflict in the Korean Peninsula. The consequences of us attacking North Korea first would be dire.
But the alternative to military action, known in Washington as strategic patience, has become for the president a symbol of all the mistakes of the past.
The era of strategic patience is over.
A view echoed by some of the president's backers.
Patience is not an option with the U.S. homeland in the nuclear shadow of Kim Jong-un.
Senator Cory Gardner, a Republican from Colorado, says strategic patience is just another name for a do-nothing approach.
If your kids are at the table and they're throwing food around at each other, do you just sit back and wait? I'm going to strategically wait until they stop.
But this isn't a food
actually
fight.
say something about it. This is far more serious.
Fight.
What we get with patience is a nuclear program in North Korea. What we got with patience is a launching of ballistic missiles.
We also got to all survive. We also are here, and there is still a Korean peninsula.
Well, if people believe they can trust Kim Jong-un, he said he would use his weapons. I believe him. And that's why we have to make sure that he doesn't have that ability.
And those weapons would likely be used first on our South Korean allies.
Most of the enemy forces are located here. 70% of their fires are.
As Defense Secretary James Mattis was reminded when he recently visited the demilitarized zone. Mattis did his best to reassure his hosts.
Our goal is not war, but rather the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
It's a tricky message he was trying to deliver, that the U.S. is ready for war with North Korea while trying to avoid it at all cost. It's the same message the military has been trying to send too.
I know a lot about the Joint Chiefs and who they are. They're very responsible, cautious men. This generation all grew up in warfare. Old guys never want to fight.
But while the generals in uniform and in the cabinet have been cautious, the president has at times been flat out threatening.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
I think the president is more of a New York City hustler. So he's learned some lessons that are not applicable in international relations or international security.
General McCaffrey is an outspoken critic of the president.
There's an element of disbelief on the part of many of us who have seen combat at close range to see him so lightly dealing with these topics.
The president has made it clear he will continue to elevate the pressure on North Korea until its leader, Kim Jong-un, steps back from the brink. The problem is that the 33-year-old North Korean leader, the third in a family dynasty that has wielded absolute power over the country for nearly 70 years, does not seem to be yielding. He sees his nuclear program as a source of national pride and the right to keep it as a matter of life and death. So the more our president vows to end it, the more tests Kim conducts. Senator Gardner dismisses the North Korean leader as a madman who needs reining in by force if necessary.
Well, I think most people agree that Kim Jong-un is a whack job.
You call him a whack job. They call you a man mixed with human dirt who has lost the basic judgment and body hair.
Yeah, it doesn't like my haircut. I didn't know if that was an Onion headline or if it was actually real.
The point is, we're not in the schoolyard. The consequences are real.
They are, and that's why we continue to make sure that we have these tools that we must use to change the situation.
President Trump said of President Kim at the UN General Assembly, and I quote, "The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea." Rocket Man
is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
The regime responded by calling our president a deranged dotard. Is that really the way two world leaders should be conducting diplomacy over such sensitive issues?
I would have said something different in front of the United Nations, but I think it's very important that we be clear that he's not going to get away with what he had in the past.
As we've got a president of the United States who is publicly taunting and mocking a 33-year-old squirrely dictator with a nuclear program. It's an adolescent kind of way of dealing with a problem. Why would we ridicule a person that quixotic, that volatile? What good could possibly come from that?
I imagine that President Trump probably has access to CIA psychological profiles of Kim Jong-un, and I'm sure it probably says somewhere in that profile, probably in red letters, do not insult this person.
Suzanne DiMaggio uses more diplomatic tones. She's been involved in back-channel negotiations with the North Koreans for a couple of years now.
We're stuck in an escalating war of words, and we have to get out of it.
Do you think that war of words could become a real war?
Absolutely. If it's not managed well, this is how you slide into war. This is how you sleepwalk into war.
And do you think we're sleepwalking into war now?
I think it's possible.
Her last meeting was in Moscow less than a month ago on the sidelines of a nuclear non-proliferation conference. And there was no doubt about the message from the North Korean envoy, Chae Sun-hui.
She said that nuclear weapons were the only way they saw to safeguard their regime from us. She made it very clear that they are going to proceed full steam ahead with their nuclear and missile program.
What would get the North Koreans to sit down at the table and actually negotiate?
I think once they feel that they can declare that they have a nuclear balance of power with the United States, then they'll be ready to negotiate. I don't think the U.S. has tried diplomacy in a way that warrants even contemplating a military response at this point.
But DiMaggio is not the one calling the shots. The president is. And during his trip, he delivered a clear threat to the North Korean leader.
Do not underestimate us, and do not try us.
Speaking before South Korea's National Assembly, the president carefully read a pre-prepared speech. There were no casual insults, but he was delivering a deadly ultimatum.
The regime has interpreted America's past restraint as weakness. This would be a fatal miscalculation.
The grave language is appropriate because any miscalculation here would be fatal to thousands, maybe millions of people. As the president departed, both Americans and South Koreans were left wondering which side was going to blink first and at what cost. That cost in human life could be astronomical. Tom Brokaw is going to be on the show a little later to remind us what we're talking about when we talk about nuclear weapons. But first, when the president landed here in Seoul, we went out on the streets to see what kind of welcome he was driving into. Traditionally, South Koreans have welcomed Americans, servicemen and presidents alike, warmly. But things are changing here. We found another equally passionate crowd. They were here to tell the American president to go home.
If Kim Jong-un or Trump decided to make war in Korean Peninsula, there's nothing we can do. It's a crazy thing.
Stay with us.